This meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. We have a number of items on the agenda today. One nomination is being listed for the first time and will be held over Shannon Saylor to be U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Virginia. In addition, 3 bills will be held over: S. 1080, the Cooper Davis Act; S. 1306, the Cops Reauthorization Act of 2023; and S. 474, the Report Act. We also have on our agenda 4 bipartisan bills that we'll vote on today in honor of Police Week. 1962, President Kennedy signed a law authorizing the president to designate May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the week in which it falls as Police Week. During this time, we honor the brave men and women who serve with dignity and integrity as they work to protect us every day. We also commemorate officers we have lost in the line of duty. We honor the courage and dedication of officers like Ariana Preston, a 24-year-old member of the Chicago Police Department, who was laid to rest yesterday after being shot and killed near her home. Ariana demonstrated a commitment to public service and a desire to make her difference in the 3 years she served at the Chicago Police Department. She sought to cultivate a sense of trust and understanding between law enforcement and the communities they serve. She also was furthering her education, balancing her career as she worked toward a Master of Jurisprudence at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. She was set to graduate last weekend. Tragically, she never had the opportunity to walk across that stage. As we consider the many different ways that we can support our law enforcement officers and ensure their success and well-being, we should reflect on the legacy that Ariana and other fallen officers have left behind. Our police officers are faced with numerous challenges every single day, both on duty and off, as they tackle the physical, mental, and emotional toll of protecting public safety and being the first responders. We can support law enforcement by making sure that our departments have resources they need to hire and retain qualified officers and to provide them with professional training they need to effectively and safely enforce our laws. We can support law enforcement by recognizing and alleviating the trauma, fatigue, and burnout they face. That is a reality. We can support law enforcement by not asking them to do everything. They are well-skilled and well-trained, but their responsibilities need to be shared at times with mental health professionals, social service providers, and others who specialize in assessing and responding to crises. And we can support law enforcement by doing our own part to make the world for the police a safer place. That means addressing the underlying causes of crime by investing in our communities and ensuring equal opportunities. And I might add that means making sure that the police officers of America are not outgunned on the streets of America and don't face weapons of war that put their lives on the line every time they go on patrol. 2 years ago, Chicago lost another bright young officer by the name of Ella Grace French. I've come to know her mother very well. Ella was killed by an individual using a handgun straw purchased from Indiana. Whenever they start this cliche and diatribe against the city of Chicago, I like to remind them that most of the crime guns that we deal with are not from our state, but from neighboring states. We owe it to officers like Ella French to end the scourge of gun violence ravaging our neighborhoods. Support for law enforcement also includes improving the way policing is done. I want to especially express my gratitude to my colleague and our friend, Cory Booker, who has continued to lead the charge to achieve bipartisan police reform. Thanks for all the work you put into this, Cory. This Police Week, I'm glad that we can all come together in a bipartisan fashion to show our police officers we appreciate what they're doing and remain committed to finding the best ways to help them. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Graham for his opening remarks before we turn to the items on our agenda.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is something we all rallying around, National Police Week. My resolution yesterday was approved by the Senate, commemorating this moment, making May 14th through the 20th National Police Week. The Senate came together and unanimously passed the resolution. And another example of what it's like to be a police officer, the dangers. Deputy Sheriff Austin Ulrich was 25 when he was murdered in an ambush attack last June in Spartanburg County, South Carolina. He was responding to a domestic call when he was ambushed and shot by the subject, who then engaged in a shootout with other officers before fleeing to the woods, getting caught later on. Deputy Aldrich died of his wounds later that evening at the hospital, leaving behind a pregnant wife who gave birth to his baby daughter in February this year. These stories are way too common. You know, as we celebrate and honor those who wear the uniform to protect all of us, it's a week that we just set aside to do that. I think what we're honoring is every day of their lives, because if you walk out the door of your home as a police officer, you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know when you're going to meet them. They have to deal with problems that most of us don't even know exist. They stop people in the middle of the night, walking up to a car, not knowing who's in it. They respond to cries for help in the most traumatic moments in people's lives where emotions run high. And so this is a moment to reflect upon that and continue a tradition of this committee of honoring these officers. And as to gun violence, yes, it is definitely a problem. But one of the things for the last couple of years anyway has been this effort to defund the police. I'm hoping that is going to pass from the American political landscape. Whatever problems we have with law enforcement, reforming the police makes sense to me, and I'm working with Senator Scott and Booker to do that. But the idea of defunding the police, thinking that will make our lives better and the cops are the problem, I think America is seeing that was folly. That made no sense. It's hurt recruitment, it's hurt retention, and I hope that chapter in American history will quickly close. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Now the committee will consider the Police Week tradition of advancing several bills to support law enforcement. S-546, the Recruit and Retain Act, sponsored by Senators Fisher and Coons, and co-sponsored by Senators Cornyn, Klobuchar, Cotton, and Tillis. This bipartisan bill allows law enforcement agencies to use their COP grant funds to cover hiring costs and support onboarding for new officers, creates a new program to encourage partnerships between local schools and police departments to foster a strong hiring pipeline for students interested in law enforcement careers. Senator Coons, would you like to speak to the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus with Senator Cornyn, I want to join my colleagues in recognizing National Police Week and the service and sacrifice of the men and women and law enforcement at the state and local level, as well as federal law enforcement. The Recruit and Retain Act responds to a significant challenge that has long faced law enforcement, but has accelerated recently: severe understaffing and the challenges with recruitment and retention. This problem isn't new. In 2019, 3/4 of law enforcement agencies reported difficulty attracting qualified candidates. In Delaware, some departments have seen a 2/3 drop in new officer applications. As departments continue to struggle with this challenge, they need some assistance. The Recruit and Retain Act would provide funding through the COPS program to cover application and onboarding costs and create a pipeline program to connect departments with local education institutions, as you referenced, and requires a study on recruitment and retention challenges nationwide. I'm confident this will bolster understaffed agencies. I want to thank Senator Fisher, Senator Cornyn, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Cotton, Senator Tillis for their support, and look forward to the committee's support and to sending this to the President's desk.
Senator Grassley.
Thank you. I want to thank both you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for putting the Project Safe Neighborhood Reauthorization on the Police Week markup. This bill includes the Ella Grace French and Sergeant Jim Smith Task Force Support Act, which funds Task Force tackling crime. Officers French and Sergeant Smith both died in the line of duty. Police Week lasts just 5 days in Congress. Officer French and Sergeant Smith remind us that law enforcement sacrifices never end. Our support should match their sacrifices. Advancing pro-policing policies is really a year-round task, not just one reserved for Police Week. The Senate showed its commitment when it passed fighting PTSD earlier this year. Several members of this co-sponsored that bill with me. I look forward to working with you in all this week and every other week to pass legislation supporting officers. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. Does any other senator seek recognition or wish to offer an amendment to the bill? Senator Booker?
Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor to this legislation. I just also want to say, with gratitude to this committee, we have done a lot of work over the last two Congresses to support our police officers. I know there's a lot of talk about this idea of defunding the police. We have taken a unanimous vote in this body on one of the votoramas against those ideas. In the last Congress, we set a record for funding the programs that support our police department, the highest COPS program funding, burn grant funding. We have found ways to work in a bipartisan way to help police officers with their mental health. Senator Grassley and I, during the pandemic, when our officers and first responders started passing away from COVID, he and I worked together to make that a presumption of a line of duty death. This committee is doing a lot, and the great thing is there's continued work to go on to support our police officers and to support many of our police leadership, police unions, and others in common sense reforms that will add to our safety. So I'm just grateful to the committee for your kind words, and especially to many of my colleagues across the aisle who continue to stand up to try to work in a bipartisan way to do things to make our nation safer.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cornyn and then Senator Blumenthal.
Just for my information, are we on the Recruit and Retain Act?
Recruit and retain, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll wait to speak
Okay,
on Project
Senator
Safe
Blumenthal?
Neighborhood.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would like to join as a co-sponsor if there's no objection. And I would also like to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, as Senator Booker has just articulated so well, but also to thank you and the ranking member because you have threaded a course here that is very, very important to keep us together despite some of the divisions and the fissures that some outside of our room here would like to engender or expand, and your leadership and the ranking members, I think, has been very important. Thank you.
Thank you. If no one else seeks recognition, the question is whether or not we do this by voice vote. If no one's asking for a roll call, all favorably reporting S546 Recruit and Retain Act of 2023, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. S1387, Project Safe Neighborhoods Reauthorization Act of 2023, sponsored by Senators Cornyn, Peters, co-sponsored by Senator Grassley, Tillis, Klobuchar, Cruz, Feinstein, and Coons. This bipartisan bill reauthorizes the Project Safe Neighborhoods program, a nationwide law enforcement program that uses evidence-based, data-driven approaches to reducing violent crime. It also includes, and I'm grateful to the sponsors for allowing this, a provision named after the late officer Ella Grace French of the Chicago Police Department and Sergeant Jim Smith, who, if I'm not mistaken, is from Iowa, to support multi-jurisdictional task forces like the one we have in Chicago. I understand there's a manager's amendment, ALL 23336, which I'll now call up and move to adopt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. Manager's amendment is adopted. Senator Cornyn, would you like to speak on the bill?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this markup today. I want to particularly thank Senator Booker, who worked with us on some concerns he had that were reflected in the changes made in the manager's amendment, primarily a transparency issue. And so I'm grateful to him, as well as all the colleagues who've co-sponsored the bill. You mentioned most of them. I think, let me just, so as not to overlook anybody, Senator Peters, Grassley, Tillis, Sinema, Klobuchar, Cruz, Feinstein, Coons, and Fisher for co-sponsoring. I first became aware of something called Project Exile, which started in a U.S. Attorney's office in Richmond, Virginia, many years ago. This was a targeted effort to go after repeat offenders, felons really, who could not legally possess or carry firearms. And these crimes tend to be committed by the same person over and over and over again. And Project Exile was an effort to work together with state, local, law, federal law enforcement to enforce federal law with mandatory minimum sentences to discourage and deter criminals from carrying firearms, which actually worked. That was when I became Attorney General of Texas. We took that statewide and called that Texas Exile, not surprisingly, and now it's morphed into Project Safe Neighborhoods. But it's a proven program. It builds trust and partnerships between law enforcement and the communities they serve through coordinated public outreach, public awareness, innovative tactics, and collaborative interventions. The results have paid off, as I said, when Project Safe Neighborhood has been credited with a 13% decrease in violent crime. We also have an impressive group of stakeholders who are supportive of this program, including the Major Cities Chiefs Association, Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, National Association of Police Organizations, Fraternal Order of the Police, and many others. I look forward to seeing the bill successfully passed out of committee and across the floor. And finally, if I can ask unanimous consent for a letter from the National Association of Police Organizations supporting this legislation be made part of the record.
Without objection, it will be made part of the record. If no one else seeks recognition or wishes to offer an amendment, on favorably reporting S 1387, Project Safe Neighborhoods Reauthorization Act of 2023, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it, and the bill will be favorably reported to the floor. S 1530, the Cops on the Beat Grant Program of 2023, is sponsored by Senators Graham, Klobuchar, Tillis. This bipartisan bill amends the COPS program to allow rural, low-income communities to use COPS hiring grants to increase law enforcement wages. It also removes a preference for agencies who can afford a higher match than required. Senators Graham and Klobuchar, would you like to speak on the bill? Senator Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was talking to former Congressman Tom Rice about a rural part of South Carolina. The COPS program has been great, but the matching requirement sometimes knocks people out in rural and poor areas of the country. So what we're trying to do is make them eligible for the COPS program with a lower match, and we're also allowing the money to be used to help increase salaries in rural America and certain urban areas where income problems exist for not just people but for the government itself. I think this would be a godsend to get some of the COPS money into these areas by having a match they can afford and allowing them to use the money to pay salaries. So I think Senator Klobuchar and Tillis and everybody, because if you got any rural folks in your state, this is a real problem.
Mr. Chairman, could I be asked unanimous consent to be added
Senator
as a
Cornyn
co-sponsor?
will be added as a co-sponsor, and Senator Klobuchar is recognized.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Thank you to Senator Graham for leading this bill, as well as our other co-sponsors. The Community-Oriented Policing Services Program has greatly added officers. 180 different law enforcement agencies rely on the COPS grant, hire nearly 1,000 full-time law officers since the start. It has allowed us to hire 136,000 law enforcement officers. This is a build-on to that to address an issue that Senator Graham just raised, and we know that police departments across the country are facing, every single police department, recruitment and retention issues, and low-income and rural departments have been most significantly impacted. In Minnesota, 13 rural departments had to close due to recruitment and retention issues. And so this is it's supported by all the major law enforcement organizations. I would also note that I talked to Senator Graham about this yesterday, that I appreciate your understanding that we're going to have the reauthorization of the whole program, the COPS program, on the agenda at some point, and we'll continue this spirit of comedy when that comes up, because we can't really change the program if we're not going to reauthorize the program.
Thank you. Those senators on the committee who wish to be shown as co-sponsors, please raise your hand. Senator Coons, Blumenthal, Booker, Durbin.
Mr. Chairman.
Blackburn, Hawley. Anyone else? Did I miss? Grassley. Added as co-sponsors. So on favorably reporting S 1530, the Cops on the Beat Grant Program parody of 2023, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill will be favorably reported to the floor. The last bill in the package is S 994, Strong Communities Act of 2023, sponsored by Senators Peters and Cornyn, and co-sponsors Tillis, Klobuchar, Cruz, Booker, Blackburn, Padilla, Blumenthal, Ossoff, and myself. This bipartisan bill allows crop grant funds to be used to provide training to officers and recruits who agree to serve in law enforcement agencies in their communities. Senator Cornyn, would you like to speak to the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Senator Peters for his leadership on this important issue, as well as all the co-sponsors to the bill. As you point out, it aims to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve by incentivizing recruits to work as police officers in the communities where they actually live. This bill gives states the flexibility to use COPS money to fund local law enforcement grants for law enforcement officers that serve in the area that they call home. And by having police in the communities they know best and where the community knows them best, this will improve community policing efforts and public safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. Does any senator wish to speak or offer an amendment to this bill? I ask consent to be added as co-sponsor to all four bills. Senator Feinstein?
I just wanted to say one thing, and that's about cops on the beat. I was mayor of San Francisco for 9 years. There was no program more favorable with people than police on the streets. They got to know them. There was a positive relationship. The crime rate went down. And I came away from the job really understanding the necessary for the juncture. And anything we can do to help, I think we should.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman?
I agree with you completely. Who seeks recognition? Senator Hirono.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor to this
Senator
bill.
Hirono be added. Anyone else? Me too. Senator Feinstein, Senator Coons will also be. Senator Graham? All right. So unfavorably reporting S 994, the Strong Communities Act of 2023. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The majority of the members present voting in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor unless there's further business to come before the Senate.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chair.
Judiciary Committee.
if I could make
White.
just one comment before we adjourn. First, I'm delighted that we've made this progress on supporting police officers, and to do it during Law Enforcement Week is particularly important. We obviously have a lot left to do, and as we look at further legislation, I just want to put in another favorable word for the doctrine of respondeat superior. Yes, that is Latin. It is a doctrine so old and venerable that it is indeed in Latin. It is also generally the law of the land in the United States, and it provides that the employer is liable for conduct of the employees as long as it's within the scope of their employment. It's the reason that when somebody slips and falls in a supermarket, they don't sue the individual who used the mop, they sue the supermarket. And I think respondeat superior applied in this context of police liability would provide a number of advantages. First, it would take enormous pressure off of qualified immunity and litigation against individual officers. Nobody sues the individual with the mop, and that's a good thing. Second, in a command organization like a police department, hiring, training, policies, discipline, culture are all the responsibility of the organization, and the line police officers are required to obey the commands of their superior officers and follow the policies and adhere to the training. So focusing on the command level, on the organization, is particularly important here. And finally, if we were to do this, anybody who's practiced in this area knows what a mess the Monell, Bivens cloud of crisscrossing doctrines is, and very often it's the individual police officer who gets entangled in that. Respondeat superior would make all of that unnecessary, and I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to have that be an important part of our resolution of these issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Bless us. Senator Cornyn?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask Senator Whitehouse, the idea that the city itself would be held responsible for any misconduct of the law enforcement officers would offer a measure of accountability to the people who are maybe in the best position to remedy the problem by disciplining, training, removing the officer in question. But would that absolve the individual officer of all accountability? In other words, would it be a mere pass-through to the city?
No, there remains all of the discipline to which the officer is subject. There remains the potential of individual liability, particularly if they are deemed to have acted outside the scope of their employment. Very broad, so unlikely. And then, obviously, if they conducted themselves in a manner that violated the criminal laws, they'd be accountable for that as well. So there would remain considerable individual accountability, but it would take the individual police officers out of the line of fire in the ordinary personal injury litigation case involving exchanges with the police. And I think it's the right way to go. Frankly, most cases like this end up with the municipality or the county or the city or the state paying at the end of the day. So it really wouldn't change that particularly much. But it would be direct, it would be clean, it would be clear. And I think most importantly, you'd see a lot of cases in which you left the individual officer out of the pleading because you wouldn't need to any more than you would need to sue the guy with the mop in the supermarket.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask to be added as a co-sponsor to all 4 pieces of
Without
legislation?
objection.
Thank you.
Senator
Mr.
Cox.
Chairman, I appreciate today's bipartisan show of support for law enforcement, but I have to say that unfortunately this committee too often undermines our brave police officer by rubber stamping extreme unqualified nominees. So I'd like to briefly discuss the wages of this committee's failure to do its job when it comes to nominations. This week, we received the welcome news that Rachel Rollins, a radical, pro-criminal Soros prosecutor, is resigning in disgrace from her perch as U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. Given Ms. Rollins' long-standing disdain for the criminal justice system, I'd say that Police Week is a good time for her long overdue departure. Over 18 months ago, my Republican colleagues and I warned that Rollins was dangerously unfit to serve as U.S. Attorney. But my Democratic colleagues refused to listen, and every single one voted to confirm her nomination on a party line vote. It was the first time in 28 years that we held a roll call vote on a U.S. Attorney nominee. Many of our Democratic colleagues accuse Republicans of partisan obstructionism. Senator Warren labeled Republicans opposing Ms. Rollins as pathetic. Senator Markey charged that Republican concerns aren't based in reality, and instead suggested that Republicans were, quote, just plain scared, and, quote, because Rachel Rollins is a strong black woman. The chairman issued a statement that Republicans were disrespecting the role of home state senators and disregarding the vital role U.S. attorneys play in our justice system, and dismissed our concerns. But during that very same markup where the committee deadlocked on Mrs. Rollins' nomination, we also voice voted out a block of 8 other U.S. attorney nominees, and we have since confirmed many more such nominees without incident. Rollins was different, however. She said openly that her goal as a prosecutor was to dismantle the criminal justice system from the inside. As a district attorney, she refused to allow prosecutors to enforce laws against fentanyl trafficking, breaking and entering, resisting arrest, or malicious destruction of property, among other crimes. The Boston Police Patrolmen's Association accused Rollins of incendiary and anti-police remarks and noted that Rollins' history of quickly and cavalierly labeling all police officers murderers had undoubtedly incited violence against the proud men and women of the Boston Police Department. Rollins, of course, dismissed their concerns as, quote, white fragility. Unfortunately, our Democratic colleagues also dismissed these ominous warnings from the Boston police. But Mrs. Rollins' problems were not limited to her abysmal professional record. She also had a long history of ethical lapses and bad judgment. We learned of a truly bizarre case of road rage where Rollins forced another vehicle out of a merge lane, threatened the driver, turned on sirens that for some reason she had in her own vehicle, and then sped off through a red light. When confronted by a news crew about it, she later threatened to report the news crew to the police. Our Democratic colleagues ignored these red flags, and every Democrat, again, voted in favor of her nomination. Before long, Rawlins used her newly confirmed position as a federal prosecutor for her own personal and political benefit, violating numerous laws. When I learned from sources in Boston federal law enforcement that Rawlins was planning to attend a political fundraiser as a U.S. attorney, despite having been advised by the Department of Justice that her appearance would violate both department policy and federal law, I referred her for investigation, kicking off simultaneous investigations by the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General and the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. Yesterday, they both released their reports, totaling over 260 shocking pages. Among their many findings, they found that Rawlins used her position for political revenge, trying to gin up and leak a bogus federal investigation to influence the outcome of a local election. She used her position to obtain free tickets to the Boston Celtics. She used her personal cell phone to leak non-public department information about federal investigations for her own political purposes. She accepted lavish gifts of travel, and she repeatedly lied to both the Inspector General and the Office of Special Counsel. These are not just any old garden variety ticky-tack ethical violations. Rawlins's conduct was so bad that the Inspector General referred her to Merrick Garland for criminal prosecution. The Office of Special Counsel, tasked with investigating allegations of Hatch Act violations, said her conduct was, quote, among the most egregious Hatch Act violations that they had ever investigated. Yet Merrick Garland took just 3 weeks, 2 of which were over Christmas and New Year's, to decide that he wouldn't prosecute Rachel Rawlins. Of course, Garland had no trouble prosecuting Joe Biden's political opponents for lying to investigators or for other process crimes. If Rachel Rawlins were a Republican, I expect his decision would also be different. So it's good to see some of our colleagues finally coming around to the light of the indisputable proof of Rawlins's unfitness for office. Yesterday, Mr. Chairman, you issued a statement that you were deeply concerned about her misconduct and supported her resignation. I hope other Democrats will join you. I also hope that you will join us in calling for Rachel Rawlins' criminal prosecution in light of clear and indisputable evidence she lied to federal investigators. But unfortunately, I don't think this committee or our Democratic colleagues have yet learned their lesson about rubber stamping unfit, extreme, party line nominees. The committee continues to force such nominees through, and in fact, on the Senate floor right now, we're considering such a nominee. Republicans have given bipartisan support to the vast majority of the president's nominees. I hope my Democratic colleagues will begin to realize that when we do raise serious concerns about not only the professional record, but the character and integrity of the nominee's fitness for office, it's worth listening with an open mind.
Thank you, Senator
Mr.
Cotton.
Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you have removed Michael Delaney from the roster for a vote today. And as we talk about people that are unfit for public service, Michael Delaney is one of those individuals. And as we reviewed his record when he came before this committee, we brought forward, and he did not deny, his use of hardball tactics against a 15-year-old girl. A 15-year-old girl. Sexual assault had been committed against Chessie Prout. And we have members of this committee who ask everybody that comes before us, have you committed sexual harassment? Have you committed sexual assault? But yet they're willing to vote for a judge who used hardball tactics against a girl to cover up that a private elite school was guilty of pushing and participating in removing anonymity from a student at that school, and making certain that people are fit for the bench, that they are fit for public office, is something that we should do. And there is hypocrisy in supporting such a person for the bench. There is hypocrisy in some of these nominations and these votes, and I appreciate that he was removed from consideration today.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Graham?
Thank you. I think it's pretty clear that I generally support district court judges most of the time. And I don't know if I've ever voted against a U.S. attorney nomination before, but Senator Cotton brought all of this to my attention. I went to talk to Senator Warren. I said, you know, once we change the rules, and we don't need to go down that road that's been done, you don't need any of us now, and there'll be a day when we don't need any of you. And the problem is, when you get in that environment, you tend to pick people that are being pushed by the most partisan folks on either side of the aisle that get reputations for the hardest of the hard. I want that voice on the bench. I want that voice as U.S. attorney. And I will continue to support my colleagues' discretion, collaborating with the White House to pick people at the district level, because I want to retain that right myself, but it can't be without bounds. So, Mr. Chairman, this is sort of a wake-up call for all of us. What happened to Senator Blackburn's U.S. attorney nomination is not lost upon me. I promise you it's not. A member of the committee chose to veto the collaboration between the home state senators and the White House. You've started something, and I think it's going to lead to some bad outcomes. So, Senator Cotton, thank you for doing your homework and alerting the committee. Others did, and I think you're proven to be right. As to Mr. Delaney, the parents of the young lady in question is here today. I got information from people in New Hampshire on the Republican side that spoke well of Mr. Delaney. I was very much inclined to support. And through the process of the hearing, and I want to compliment my colleagues for asking hard questions, you proved, I think, that Mr. Delaney was not ready for prime time. I think the questions you asked, he couldn't give a coherent answer to. And these groups don't mean that much to me, but there's like 8 progressive groups: National Employment Law, People's Party, Revolutionary. I don't even, can't read your handwriting anyway. You can see it on the internet. There are 8 of them that don't like Mr. Delaney. So I think it would be good for the committee not just to ask, have you ever done anything wrong, but when somebody can't give a coherent answer, to do something about it. So I have tried to be cooperative as possible, but I'm no on Delaney. I'm glad I was no on Rawlings, and there's a few more others out there that you need to look long and hard at. Thank you.
I'm going to conclude here acknowledging my friend Senator Graham's remarks. I think as long as it's clear that it applies to nominees from both sides and their standard is applied in that fair fashion, I certainly endorse your remarks, not as to any individual, but as to the conduct of this committee. I would also say to Senator Cotton, anytime a public official falls short of their ethical obligations, whether it's in the executive, legislative, or judicial branch of government, there must be consequences. I support Ms. Rollins' decisions to resign so the U.S. Attorney's Office can continue its important work, and the Senate Judiciary Committee stands adjourned.